Wet on Tuesday, turning less warm but still around average.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. There's never been a more interesting but also critical time in British politics, and I can't wait to bring you the biggest stories of the day with the best factual accuracy and also a few of my own opinions thrown in. We'll engage in passionate but always polite debate with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Monday to Thursday, 10 till 12 on TV, on radio and online.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
On the Mark Stein Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Stein Show.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
For helping our great nation.
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland. On TV.
On radio
and online.
We're proud to be the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Good morning and welcome to Saturday Morning with Esther and Philip. Coming up today, we're going to be talking about allegations of bullying against Dominic Raab by civil servants at the Ministry of Justice.
But was it bullying?
Well,
was it bullying?
Apparently, it includes him throwing his Pret salad, so let us hope he doesn't do that very often, and don't be taking a leaf out of his...
Very bad, very bad. But look, nobody likes a bad loser either, and that's exactly what Trump is turning out to be. Since he lost that presidential election, he can't get over it. We'll be talking about those midterm elections. And virtual reality is going to become a reality, a brand new headset that when you're playing the game, if you die in that game, you'll be dying in real life. Absolutely unbelievable. Should it be allowed? Well, we'll be looking at that later.
And we want to hear your views today, as always. So if you want to get involved in the conversation, contact us, gbviews@gbnews.uk. But before all of that, it's the news with Tamsin.
Philip, thank you. Good morning from the GB newsroom. It's 1 minute past 10. Residents of the Ukrainian city of Kherson have gathered in the streets to celebrate liberation by their armed forces after Russia's retreat. Kherson was the only regional capital city captured by Russian troops since the invasion began in February. The British Ministry of Defence says the withdrawal brings significant reputational damage to Moscow. Vladimir Putin's spokesperson has denied the move is a defeat and says the region remains part of Russian territory after it was annexed in September. Ukraine's foreign minister says there isn't a single indicator that Russia is sincerely seeking peace talks.
The only response we always received from them, even when we sat down at the table, was, here is the list of ultimatums, take it or leave it. And the set of these ultimatums meant full capitulation and unconditional surrender of Ukraine.
Well, world leaders have scrapped the so-called family photo for their upcoming G20 summit. They're refusing to be pictured alongside President Putin or his representatives after unanimously condemning Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Putin has confirmed he'll skip the summit altogether due to a schedule requiring him to be in Russia. It's understood the Prime Minister is considering cuts to defence spending amid rising inflation when he announces his budget next week. The 2019 Conservative manifesto pledged to increase the defence budget by at least 0.5% above inflation every year. The department is expected to get a cash funding increase, but it's been suggested in real terms this will be devalued by inflation, which currently stands at 10%. The Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, has warned of a tough road ahead. Former Chief Economist at the Cabinet Office, Jonathan Portes, told GB News he thinks cuts to public spending is the wrong move.
The UK clearly does need tax rises for fiscal sustainability because we need to finance a decent quality public services. That doesn't necessarily mean we need to do that all right away. And it certainly doesn't mean we need to cut public spending, which in my view would be, in general, quite the wrong thing to do.
Well, the Chancellor is being urged to extend the 5% cut in 5 pence cut in fuel duty, which was set to remain in place until March next year. The AA is pushing for the extension amid the high costs for motorists. They say petrol is over 2 pence a litre more expensive just before the fuel duty cut. Their latest research also shows more than 70% of drivers are being deterred from going electric amid rising electricity prices. Counting continues in the US midterm elections with the race for control of the US Congress neck and neck. Republicans are favourites to win the House of Representatives, securing 211 seats. They need an additional 7 seats to secure a majority. But the fight for the Senate is on the edge, with both Republicans and Democrats having 49 votes. The biggest concerns for voters are the economy and abortion. 2 councils have lost bids for High Court injunctions to stop hotels housing asylum seekers. East Riding in Yorkshire and Ipswich Council both requested for an interim injunction to prevent further migrants being accommodated at hotels. However, a judge has refused, saying it's the statutory duty of the Home Office to provide accommodation to asylum seekers. The royal family will gather for the annual Royal British Legion Festival of Remembrance. The event will commemorate the country's war dead and mark the 40th anniversary of the Falklands War. It will also pay tribute to the late Queen and the 70 years of service to the country and to British armed forces. The women's England rugby team have suffered heartbreak after losing to New Zealand in the World Cup final. The match saw England's Red Roses enjoying a strong and dominating first half, but their rivals came back in the second half with the Black Ferns scoring a try in the last 9 minutes to give a 34-31 victory. The final broke the record for the biggest attendance for a women's rugby match, with more than 40,000 tickets sold. Fans have said despite the loss, they were still proud of the team.
It could have gone either way for quite a lot of the game, so I think in this room everyone was just really passionate about England women and the Loughborough Lightning girls here, so we're all pretty gutted, but we're also really proud of everyone out there. Like, it's a massive honour for them to represent the Rose and put on a great performance like they did today.
This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now, though, it's back to Esther and Philip.
Thank you there, Tamsin. Now, to start the show today, we're delighted to be joined in the studio by historian Dr. Tessa Dunlop and broadcaster Simon Fanshawe to look at the papers. So who should we start with? Let's go with you, Simon.
Well, the Daily Mail's had a fit, hasn't it? I just think the word woke should be banned now, because it doesn't mean anything, you know. They've gone balmy because this bloke who's, I don't know who he is, he's called Matt Jukes, he's one of the seniors, the anti-terrorist guy, and he wore this vest, it's called the Menno vest, and what it does is it's...
Got the right name, though, hasn't it, the Menno vest?
It simulates female menopause, so it gives you hot flushes and so on and so forth. And, of course, they'd gone on this thing saying, oh, the police are obsessed with being woke now and, you know, blah, 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 blah. And I bet terrorists are sitting there thinking, oh, well, you know, he'd be too busy wearing his vest to kind of... so I'll go and plant a bomb. And you just think... What I find insulting about this is that the implication of that is that you, were you a woman going through menopause, could not also, at the same time, do a bit of terrorism prevention. Actually, it seems to me you could do both, and it's actually quite a good idea. And I have this general thing about men and women. It seems to me that men having more empathy with what women actually go through is a good thing. I think men should be made to live with avatars of themselves and put up with their own bad behaviour. You know, I think men should be made to go through some kind of childbirth. You know, now, I'm not an expert on living with women, as you know. I mean, when it
I've
comes
deliberately ducked that one, by the way.
I'm a bit of a conscientious objector when it comes to actually having, you know, those kind of... I'm aware of the white poppy when it comes to heterosexuality. But I just think, you know, empathy's a good thing. I was saying to you earlier on that I once spent a day in a wheelchair. I mean, it taught me tons of stuff, but it didn't stop me going about my daily business. That's the point. And Michael Gove's ex-wife, Sarah Vine, has gone bonkers about it. But the implication is that you can't solve crime and have the menopause.
Well, I think, Philip, you've got a confession here.
Yeah.
You've got a vest.
No.
You wear a Menno vest.
He's tried it, though.
No, my secret's out. I have actually been and worn a Menno vest as well.
So what was it like?
Well, I mean, I'm always hot anyway, but it just makes you even more hot. Basically, it was just sort of you get this sort of growing heat, which I don't really need because I'm always hot.
But does it come and go? Like, does it replicate?
Well, this didn't. No, this was just coming rather than going. To be perfectly honest, it was just getting.
I mean, Esther,
be careful how you phrase this, Simon.
Are you on the way in or are you on the way out?
Watch out! You're skating on very thin ice.
It's very thin ice. Can I empathise, or should I be trying on a vest to see what it's like?
Well, can I say I do agree with the point. I mean, you spent a day in a wheelchair. I spent some time in my constituency blindfolded with a guide dog. To see what it was like.
It's really great,
and it was a fantastic experience, and I don't
Hang
see
on,
it
the headline we're taking away from this story is that you are now woke hot Phil.
Yes.
Well, I'm certainly not.
He liked the hot Phil, the woke bit. He won't.
Congress.
I've been described as many things, never woke or hot, to be honest. But,
Should I do this? I thought was a very interesting story in a very different way, and it was actually Fraser Nelson's piece this week, which was with millions on benefits. We don't need a big migration boost, and this all came about because you'll know the chief executive of Next, Simon Wolfson, said, "I can't find people to fill these jobs," which was working in a warehouse, £9.80 an hour, 5 a.m. start, find your own way there. You couldn't find it. So the answer was to bring people into the country. Now, I do not agree with that answer straight away. People were talking about market forces. Well, I've got a few market forces for Simon there. A, are you paying enough? B, is it easy enough for people to get to work at that time in the morning? Is it working? And equally, we need to look at now, we've got over 5 million people on unemployment benefits in one way or another. I know some won't be able to do work, but there must be 1 million, and we've got 1.3 million job vacancies, so there must be 1 million that we can train up and get to do work. I do believe we've got to make sure our people are working. We don't just go to the far corners of the earth, sucking in more people to do jobs that we don't want to do.
This is where politically I think we come full circle and almost meet, Esther. Because I'm clearly wokey Remainy compared to you guys, if I may.
Well, not now compared to Phil with this vest.
Not compared to Phil, forget Phil. But actually, I was always sceptical about the impact of freedom of movement because I felt the economic inequality of Eastern Europe, I know that part of the world very well, compared to Western Europe, meant that they were going to experience, and they did, the most appalling brain drain. And we never talked about it.
Yeah.
You couldn't, at the height of mass migration from the East to the West, you couldn't find a doctor, a good doctor, a good vet or a good nurse in Romania. And I could see our aggressive NHS adverts in English, in Romanian, when I went on websites in Romania, in train stations in Romania. And that felt
And I've
wrong.
always agreed with that, and I've always thought that were wrong. I mean, you were saying, Simon, earlier.
Yeah, there are so many aspects to this. One thing that really aggravates me about the whole debate, which is what you're beginning to get to, is that it's talked about as numbers and it's not talked about as skills. Yeah. I mean, because the other end of the brain drain, you're absolutely right, is that the reparations, if you like, that are paid from this country, people working in this country, back to their home country, is bigger than foreign aid. I mean, this is an enormous injection of cash, at least, into the families there. So, the point about it is that... In some places. But economically, it works both ways, is my point. Secondly, I agree with you about the brain drain. But the whole idea that Brexit would somehow have solved immigration, it was always a nonsense. It was always about having a decent immigration policy. It was never about Brexit.
It was about control.
So what you've got now is you've got far more immigration from non-EU countries.
But I would argue that Brexit rode the common tiger of immigration to get the votes in.
Oh, of course it did.
And the other thing, just on a personal note, so I'm married to Romanian, I better put my colours on the mast. But, for example, if you go to a medical school in Bucharest, this was very much the case a few years ago when we had a stronger economy and the Eurozone a weaker one. There was a joke, that is ticket to go abroad. But the Romanians are paying to train those nurses and doctors, and we benefit. And it's not just Romania, it's India, it's all sorts of countries, actually.
And that's why I said we should be training them.
Yes,
People are now doing a sort of an apprenticeship levy. That should go to that, Phil.
Well, that's legal immigration. I wanted to talk about illegal immigration and people coming over the channel. And people always say in politics, if you want to keep a secret, make a speech in Parliament about it, right? And
Simon nearly spat out his throat.
But no, it is
just you, Phil?
It is, well, it certainly applies to me, but it does apply across the piece. And a case in point was this week on Monday, when Robert Jenrick was answering questions about these asylum seekers coming over the channel, and never got picked up anywhere. I was absolutely flabbergasted by this, but of course everyone just sort of sat as if it was normal. And I'm going to read you what he said. He said it's essential that we accelerate decision-making now within the Home Office, because of course there's a massive backlog of cases being considered. He said that over the summer they piloted a new approach in their office in Leeds, which is now ready to roll out across the country. This will take us, get this is the bit I nearly fell over. This would take us from an average of around 1.5 decisions per caseworker per week to as many as 4 per week. And I'm sat there thinking, 1.5 decisions per caseworker per week. I thought he was going to say per day, and I would have been shocked at how low it was.
The one I like about those, what is half a decision? I mean, that is like...
I mean, what? There's no wonder we've got a backlog when this decision-making process is
Phil, that's
pathetic.
what I mean. That's exactly what I meant about it. This is about having a proper immigration policy. Every immigration lawyer that I know, and I know a few, partly because my husband is an immigrant, so similar to Tessa, so we've gone through a process. And so I've met and talked to lots and lots of people about this. And what is quite clear is that everybody wants a process, A, that's swift, B, that's clear, and people know what's going on, and it can't be exploited, because it's not these poor people coming looking for a better life that are the problem. It's it's the bees that are exploiting them. It's the gangs.
We can argue about that.
No, we can't have anybody else in.
Crown has just slipped
It is. I thought I had to do this. But who's managing these caseworkers to say, 1.5 decisions a week? That's fine. You've got a cracking week's work there.
Phil, I'll tell you who's managing them. It's the government that's been in power since 2010.
I suspect it's the civil servants who are managing them.
Hang on a second. Since 2010, if over 12 years your government can't get a grip of a policy where they are in charge of, then frankly, I think you ought to point the finger at yourselves.
Well, all I will say on benefits and unemployment, whereas it was, and it absolutely, the people were in work and we were the highest employment and lowest unemployment since COVID, This has been the change that nobody's done any conditionality, and this is why. So actually, COVID in that regard has absolutely thrown the unemployment and the employment up in the air and benefit conditionality. I say that, I haven't worked there for 7 years, go on.
No, I was just thinking about the 1.5 caseload. Of course, if you suggest that they might need to do more than that, they could always just go on strike, which is very trendy.
Well, to be honest, based on these
They
figures,
are on strike.
Some of the civil service are on strike. I don't think these...
Well, it sounds like it, doesn't it? Industrial action there.
1.5 decisions a week. They may as well be on strike, hadn't they? As 1.5 decisions a week per caseworker. What are they doing?
It is slow. Can we move on to Female Matters once more, if you wouldn't mind? Now, I have a friend who's just acquired the crown. She's the new chief exec of the Young Women's Trust. You may not be aware of this, Phil, but I'm now, given that I've discovered your underbelly of woke, it is campaigning for young women's justice, because actually something extraordinary like the amount that a young woman is worth per hour compared to a man has actually gone down, so the difference has grown. And which is all sorts of reasons. One, we value male manual work, unskilled work, more than we do female unskilled work. There's that old thing of, you know, a man washing a window on the outside is paid sort of 3 times what a woman hoovering on the inside.
Not according to Next. They were all £9.80 an hour, but carry on.
How did they manage to get anyone on £9.80 an hour? But I think it goes back to this idea that we're equal. And I believe strongly that, if anything, young women should be paid more, because we're on this, if you want to have a family, you're on this extraordinary timeline as a young girl. You have about 10 good years. Excuse me, I have a frog. 10 good years to get your act together if you want to have a family. Don't look cynical. That's biology. It's been baked into us since time began. And they need, if anything, protected and better paid. And what's really interesting is Jennifer Aniston, I've defaced her somewhat, I didn't mean to. She's finally talking out about this. She was the sort of epitome of an older woman who'd done so much with her life, but heaven help us, had not yet procreated. And we talked about it, and there was unkind rumour and speculation. And she said, look, actually, I was going through IVF when all that speculation took place. She says, finally, it's dry in there and ain't no baby coming out, and so I'm going to talk about this openly. She says, I wish I had frozen my eggs, but all the doctors are piling in and saying, hang on, freezing your eggs is a lottery ticket, but it's not an insurance. And I'm someone who had 7 rounds of IVF, and what I would say is, girls, if you want to have a baby, do it as young as you can, but for that to happen, we need to pay our girls properly.
Yeah, I was looking sceptical, because in my time on the Women and Equality Select Committee...
Oh, Phil, rolling out the big names
exactly.
here.
We looked at the gender pay... We looked at the gender pay gap. I haven't got... I didn't know you were going to mention it. I haven't got the figures to hand, but on the gender pay gap figures... Women were paid more than men in the 20s. The gender pay gap was...
No, we're getting nods here from Simon.
Phil's wrong. Women are paid more early on.
The ONS figures are quite clear about this.
You're absolutely wrong.
No, the ONS figures... Honestly, I'm not joking. The ONS figures are clear that in the 20s, women... There's a gender pay gap in favour of women. It's the gender pay gap that goes against women happens in their over 30s when they've had
How flexible is your show? Could I get the chief exec up in the next hour?
Yeah, you certainly can.
Absolutely.
But then Phil, next week, and Phil will get the figures.
I'll get the official
figures. We'll get all the official figures.
She's booked.
Let's do it next week. And
I'll bring her back from the Bahamas as a high-paid exec.
She can do it online. She doesn't need to come back. Anyway, look, all of these things we're talking about, whether it was unemployment, who should be doing those jobs? Shouldn't we get our own people into work? It's the menopause vest. Can you believe it? Phil's even tried one. And women, should they get paid slightly more at a younger age because, you know, they're going to miss out on childbearing years, possibly, if they don't. Anyway, get in touch with us. You know how you can do that. GBViews at gbnews.uk. And we'll see you both at 11 o'clock. But coming up after the break, we'll be joined by GB News political reporter Catherine Forster, talking about former Secretary of State of Education too, Kit Malthouse, and pollster Matt Goodwin. Don't go anywhere.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Welcome back. It's 10:22. Joining us now in the studio is GB News political reporter Catherine Forster. Catherine, welcome. We wanted to speak about Dominic Raab and what's in the papers today about...
Tomato throwing.
Well, yes. Is it tomato? Yeah, salad.
Tomato from
salad tossing.
Salad.
He's
salad
moved
tossing.
on in terms of
salad tossing. Yes.
Lunch stories from Pret-a-Manger, because a few years ago there was a story, wasn't there, that he had the same lunch from Pret-a-Manger every day, and that was. But
can I tell you that is more the Dominic Raab I know, which is very sort of precise, methodical, more machine-like. That is the more. I mean, this tossing tomatoes is strange.
If he has the same salad every day, you'd think he'd realise he doesn't like the tomatoes.
It was the same sandwich. I think it was tuna.
a sandwich. I think he's obviously branched out, and maybe the salad has been disappointing. Right. But yeah, so take your pick. There's lots of stories about Dominic Raab today in the Mirror, in the Sun, in the Guardian, about supposed bad behaviour, saying that he, as Secretary of State for Justice and Deputy Prime Minister, was a difficult boss, that civil servants found him hard to work with. The Mirror saying that he was dubbed the incinerator because he burnt through staff so quickly. The Sun are saying that he had thrown 3 tomatoes, I imagine cherry tomatoes, not been clarified, across the room into the bin. I mean,
What's wrong with that?
Let's remember, shall we, that Gordon Brown, when he was Prime Minister, apparently threw mobile phones.
At people?
Once, yes, apparently also staplers, once put a printer onto the floor, swept aside. An aide was warned when he came in to beware of flying Nokias. So, tomatoes...
Throwing a tomato in the bin, that's now a sacking offence.
Still one of my favourite bosses and favourite people in TV was Janet Street Porter, and trust me, she had a temper as well, and things could be thrown around, but we knew that of her, and everybody had her in high esteem.
Alex Ferguson at Manchester United had the hairdryer treatment for his players at half-time. The thing is, though, what I wonder about here, Catherine, is how much of this is civil servants now that if you want to get a minister sacked, just make up some complaints about bullying, and it's like the fast track to a sacking. And I just wonder whether or not this is people who don't like the agenda that Dominic Raab has got. He wants to scrap the Human Rights Act, which is very precious to lots of people in the Ministry of Justice. And I just wonder whether or not all of this is as it seems, or whether or not this is part of a campaign to get rid of a minister who's pursuing an agenda that those civil servants don't like.
There does seem to be a pattern, doesn't there? Because Rishi Sunak has only been Prime Minister 2.5 weeks, and first there were the attacks on Suella Braverman, understandable after what had happened with the sacking stroke resignation the week prior. Then Gavin Williamson then resigned, and now we've moved on to Dominic Raab. Certainly not everybody will be happy that his plan, the British Bill of Rights, which is going to override European law, part of it specifically was because the Rwanda migrant plan was ultimately upheld in British courts, and then it was thwarted and blocked by the European Court. his Bill of Rights would mean that that can't happen. Now, Liz Truss shelved it and sacked him when she came in. There's going to be a huge battle to get it through, I would say, but not everybody will like that. But of course, you know, we're joking about the tomatoes, aren't we? But times have changed. Throwing things in a work environment is not good. And where do you draw the line between
I get that,
bullying
I will
and
also, I mean,
being a tough boss?
I think we need to have some clarification exactly what it was. It all seems very vague. And people are judging people, and there's all gossip in the papers. You'd say it's already a smear campaign that's marching on without knowing it. And equally, remember, we've got to get civil servants back into work. I mean, is this against that they don't want a 5-day week in the office, catching up with things? They don't like somebody who is very regimented. He is very methodical. This is a guy, grammar school guy, Cambridge guy, won all kinds of awards, jiu-jitsu sort of specialist. So he has got exacting standards. Is it shying away from that? I mean, it's big questions. We don't know the answers, but I think we need to hear a little bit more of his side.
That may be part of it. I mean, certainly he's known in Westminster as having high standards. As he said, no official complaint has ever been made, but has high standards and expects a lot from his staff. But I think one thing worth noting, 100,000 civil servants have just voted to strike in the last few days. Some of those are in, not the Ministry of Justice, but the Cabinet Office, and it's the Cabinet Office that are in charge of overseeing the government's response to strikes. So
there you go. See, the plot thickens. Catherine, thank you very
much. I should just say that when I went to see David Cameron when he was Prime Minister once, and about something to do with the Home Office, and David Cameron, in the days gone by, used to be a Home Office advisor, and he said that when the Home Office split and part of it went to the Ministry of Justice, David Cameron said to me that all the sort of right-leaning people stayed at the Home Office and all the lefties went into the Ministry of Justice. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but it may explain some of this. But I can't get over that throwing some tomatoes into a bin is supposedly a sackable offence.
Well, we'll find out. Catherine Foster, thank you very much indeed. You'll be keeping us up to speed with that story. Now, Chancellor Jeremy Hunt has warned the UK faces a tough road ahead following the news that the economy has contracted in the last quarter, a sign of a recession to come.
Fears over fiscal instability may prompt the Chancellor to announce a wave of spending cuts and tax rises.
The education sector could also be hit, with a survey from a teaching union indicating that schools in England are considering cutting teaching assistants to save money.
Well, we're now joined by former Secretary of State for Education, Kit Malthouse. Kit, thank you very much indeed for joining us. So, obviously the Chancellor's got some big decisions to make this coming week, some perhaps difficult decisions to make this coming week. You were very recently the Secretary of State for Education. Should he be finding some savings in that budget, or is there no savings to be made there?
Well, it's certainly the case that things are very tight at education, and schools are already struggling with rises in energy cost and general inflation and cost of living, and of course a 5% pay rise which was given to teachers last year, not all of which the funding not all of which was included in their budget settlement. So it is very tough, and I have to say I've seen some quite alarming stuff in the paper over the last couple of days, where they are indicating that there might be cuts to the education budget, and as far as I can see, I can't see how that can be acceptable, particularly when you bear in mind that during the pandemic it was children and their education that was most significantly damaged, and we're just in the middle of a kind of catch-up. Teachers across the country are working really hard to get kids back up to speed. Them, performance having dipped naturally during the pandemic. And so to disturb that dynamic, just as this generation are getting back on their feet, would seem to me a really, really, unacceptable thing to do.
This, but government will say they've given an extra £4 billion to the education budget. They're also helping with the energy bill relief scheme. So won't that go some way to supporting the schooling's budget?
Well, yeah, look, definitely this inflation and pre the war in Ukraine, education had a good settlement. It absolutely did. You're right, £4 billion going in. But since then, obviously, we've seen significantly rising costs. So within that £4 billion, there was a sort of estimate of a pay rise of about 3%. It's actually come in at 5%, with even more for lower paid teachers, because don't forget we have a manifesto commitment to get the starting salary to teachers up to 30,000 quid. And so the pressure on schools is really, really intense. And I know, certainly from my time at DFE, that head teachers across the land, and not just the people who normally complain about money, but people really at the top of their game are now looking forward to next year to their budgets and saying, can we manage with the same number of staff? Are we going to have to reduce headcounts? And if we reduce headcount, what impact is that going to have on quality of education? Now, when you make cuts like Jeremy's going to have to make, and don't get me wrong, I agree with fiscal responsibility. I think we have to look at our spending. We've definitely been spending beyond our means over the last few years. You have to do that within a framework of priorities. You have to say, look, there are some areas that we have to protect because they're so important and so vital that we've got to stand by them, even in times of financial difficulty. And for me, the number one should be schools and our children's education, because if we don't get that right, there will be a disaster, not just for them personally, but for the whole country down the road as they move through the education system and into the job market. So I would be putting schools and education front and center as an area where, if anything, we should be investing, not necessarily cutting.
Kit? I just wondered, is not this part of the problem, though, in government, that, government ministers will all say, yes, of course we agree with the principle that we need to cut spending. Then every government minister goes along to argue to protect their own budget and that their own budget's really important and that we never actually get anywhere. I mean, isn't at some point some government minister going to have to say, look, actually, yeah, my department does need to find some savings? And so if education isn't for the cut, in your opinion, where should Jeremy Hunt go to cut the money he needs to save?
So I completely agree with you, Philip. And one of the problems we've got, certainly that I've seen in government, is that the Treasury always does a spending round or a cuts round by departments. And so they pit departments against each other. And what never happens is the cabinet never sits down, or indeed the party never sits down and says, right, what is our order of priority? What is the most important thing that we want to protect, and what is the least important thing? And then let's cut accordingly. And you never get a kind of thematic approach to it. Now, from my point of view, when I was Secretary of State for Education, there I was beavering away, trying to make the budgets work for schools as much as possible and talking to them about their problems. And then I heard in the House of Commons, as it happens, a transport minister stand up and boast at the dispatch box that the Department for Transport was going to spend £9.9 billion on cycling and walking initiatives. Now, that might be great in times of plenty, good icing to have an active travel budget, but actually, compared to the education and the welfare of our children, I don't think that's as important. Yeah. I'd be quite happy to see that £9.9 billion go, and for that money to go into the education budget.
Kit Malthouse, delighted to have you on this morning, and I think we should put that out to our viewers. Where do you make cuts? Should that go into the education budget and not into an active travel, cycle and walking lane? And talking about transport, I'd be getting rid of High Speed 2 as well. So there are things you can cut without cutting education.
Well said.
Thank you.
Now, are Britons turning away from Labour and the Conservatives in favour of third parties? That's what a recent poll is suggesting.
A survey of British voters conducted by People Polling found that the newly formed Reform Party reached 8% support, a figure that, if accurate, would make them a serious electoral threat to the Conservative Party. Joining
us now is the man behind the poll. Welcome to the show, Matthew Goodwin. Matthew, thank you very much for joining us. I mean, how worried should the Labour Party be about the increase in support for the Greens, and how worried should the Conservative Party be about support for the Reform Party?
Well, the short answer is I think they should worry a great deal. The Greens are up to 9%, but the Reform Party, led by Richard Tice, of course, is up to 8%. That's the highest level of support for reform that we've ever had. In our polls. It's also the highest level of support the party has had on record. And to give you some context, you might remember the UK Independence Party under Nigel Farage. It took UKIP about 20 years to get up to 8% of the vote. Reform are clearly there a lot earlier, but I think they're benefiting from all of this disillusionment and disgruntlement among 2019 Conservative voters. So to me, this is actually quite a significant shift that will almost certainly cost Rishi Sunak the next election if it continues to take place.
Matt, I was looking at your Twitter feed and you'd also done one about Stop the Oil activists. Should they have had harsher punishment? And then you looked at who thought they should have and what the problem was there. So the Conservative supporters, I think it was 82%, said we should be doing something sort of firmer action against it. Labour wasn't. It was only 23%. But is this key information here? And this is where the Conservative voters are saying you're not dealing with the issues that matter to us, and that's where they're going to reform.
I think that's a great point, Esther. I think when you look at Just Stop Oil, they're clearly on the wrong side of public opinion. We also found this week only 13% of Britain expresses some support for the disruptive tactics that they've been using. Interestingly, by the way, that jumps to about a quarter of 18 to 24-year-olds. But you're absolutely right. Look, the way I see this is, remember the 2019 general election, the Conservatives have an electorate that is much more conservative, right? It wants to see tougher action on issues like migration.
Isn't it? Conservatives supporting conservatism, yes.
Well, it wants to take tougher action on the small boats. It wants to take tougher action on these environmental activists. It doesn't want the police and public sector organisations being overtly political. It wants them to remain neutral. So whenever we poll these questions, as we're doing on a regular basis, what I think we're finding is a Conservative electorate that basically no longer really believes that the Conservative Party is what its name implies. Now, Rishi Sunak has to jump on this. He has to neutralise this, because in a tight election, don't forget, we also find Labour are still 21 points ahead in the polls. In a tight election, if you gave Reform even 3 or 4%, that in itself could be enough to cost the Conservatives the next election. So watch this space. Rishi Sunak would be my message.
What would you think, Vic? Pacts? Will people be making pacts?
I don't know whether that'll happen or not. But I mean, you can obviously see that with the crime situation, the law and order issue, the illegal migration, you can see why Conservative voters would be disillusioned. I just wondered, Matthew, obviously we've got the autumn statement coming up this week. I mean, if the government were to put up taxes and things like that, would that have also a negative impact on the Conservatives' polling, or is the message of Jeremy Hunt about fiscal responsibility going to be enough to persuade them that what he's doing is the right thing?
I think when it comes to the economy, the damage, in a sense, has already been done. The Conservatives are on life support primarily because of the reaction to the last mini budget, and before that to things like Partygate. So overall, I think the opportunity for Hunt is to take the party off life support and to try and stabilise that vote, rather than to cost the party even more support going forward. But there remains, look, here's one thing to remember. Whenever a government has presided over the kind of financial crisis that we've been witnessing ever since COVID, that party typically has gone on to lose the next general election. So the odds are stacked against the incumbent government. So again, watch this space.
Matt Goodwin, thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning. Thank you. Now, we've got lots of views coming in. Do you want to go first, Phil?
Dennis says, all these young people claiming benefits will never return to work. Why should they? They get paid to stay at home. What a joke this country has become.
Julia says, unless a person on benefit is genuinely disabled, all others should be made to work for the benefits they receive. Too many are attending interviews for jobs and purposely making it impossible for the company to employ them. That was Julia. We were talking about Dominic Raab and accusations of bullying. Edward says, I think questions need to be asked of the civil service. They seem to want to prevent any Home Secretary from cracking down on the crisis in the Channel. They did it with Amber Rudd, they did it with Priti Patel, and now Suella Braverman. And Keith says, perhaps all police stations should have a social services department too, so the police could hand social problems work directly over to this department within the station to free police up from that type of work. Very interesting, because the Met Commissioner was talking about that today in the papers, how many people were calling the police for some criminal incident. It was 22%. Lots of other things. Social care is what people are getting in touch with the police about. So, Keith, good point. And Denise says the unions and civil servants are using any measure they can to oust the government. They just don't want to implement the policies the government were elected on. Shameful. Keep those views coming in. And coming up after the break, we'll be talking to Labour MP Tan Desi about his campaign for a National Sikh War Memorial. So don't go anywhere.
This Sunday on Mark Dolan Tonight, my Mark Meets guest is one of the most colourful and controversial politicians in the country, former Business Secretary Jacob Rees-Mogg. We'll get his views on the economy, on the nurses' strike, on Brexit and our new PM Rishi Sunak. That's Jacob Rees-Mogg live on Mark Dolan Tonight, this Sunday from 9.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Friday and Sunday night from 9, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
We're on the same page again. There's something good happening.
Let Ian finish. Don't be such a cranky. That mini budget was the tip of the iceberg.
And on Saturday, my show just got bigger. From 8, it's Mark Dolan's Saturday Night In.
You can't govern a country if you can't speak. Stop talking.
My God, we reached the end. I've never been early in my life. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. There's never been a more interesting but also critical time in British politics, and I can't wait to bring you the biggest stories of the day with the best factual accuracy and also a few of my own opinions thrown in. We'll engage in passionate but always polite debate with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Monday to Thursday, 10 till 12 on TV, on radio and online.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Welcome back. It's now 10:43. Now, tomorrow is Remembrance Sunday, a day in which we remember the service and sacrifice of all those from Britain and the Commonwealth who protected our freedoms and way of life in conflict around the world.
Joining us now to talk about the role played by Sikhs during the two world wars is Labour MP for Slough, Tan Desi. Tan, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Tens of thousands of Sikhs died in the two world wars. Tell us about your campaign for a national war memorial for Sikhs.
Well, lovely to join you, Esther and Phil. And I think in terms of this time when we are reflecting upon the supreme service and sacrifice of those from around the world who contributed to our freedom, our collective freedom. And amongst those, as you rightly pointed out in your introduction, were tens of thousands of Sikh soldiers who made the ultimate sacrifice, who laid down their lives in both world wars. More than 100,000 were injured. In fact, the British Sikh community is extremely proud of the contribution of their ancestors, the likes of my great-grandfather who fought in the First World War, lost a leg, my grandmother's brother fought in the Second World War. Many others from within the Sikh community have got an incredibly strong history and heritage, that tradition within the military. In fact, Phil, one of the most amazing facts is that the Sikh community had the highest proportion of Victoria Crosses of any community. So proportionately, the level of valor, the level of service was incredible. And that was despite the fact that the British Indian Sikh community only made up 2% of the total population. They made up 20% of the British Indian Army. And I think many of your viewers will be aware of the fact that during the Second World War, and in fact during the First World War, but during the Second World War, more than 2.5 million soldiers formed what was, in essence, the largest volunteer army in history. So incredible amounts of individuals, but incredible amount of service and sacrifice. And I think that we all need to collectively come together to celebrate that. And that is why we embarked upon the campaign for a national Sikh War Memorial in the centre of London. I'm pleased to say that in 2018, when I laid down an early day motion in the House, we got cross-party support. So whether it was Labour, Conservative, Lib Dem, DUP, SNP, everybody came together. And in fact, that was, I think, the most signed early day motion for several years. So we had that support. We've got government support. We've got the Mayor of London support. But ultimately, it will come down to a determination by Westminster City Council, who in due course, once we've gone through the pre-planning application process, they will then be determining about the decision as to whether a national Sikh War Memorial will be cited in Central London.
Tan, what's most important, you're coming out with these figures here that most people will be surprised about, whether it's those who've won the most Victoria Crosses, as a percentage of the population, how many Sikhs were there. And it's not just about those, as you mentioned, who gave their life, it's also those who came back home severely disabled and injured, and all because, you were proud Sikhs in a British community and, fought these battles on our behalf. So we're delighted that you have been spearheading this memorial. And, I guess we're just hoping that having a voice here today will speed up that process for you and for that recognition, Phil.
What's the timescale for this decision by Westminster Council, Tan?
Well, thank you very much for both of your support and those warm words as well. As you said, so many were wounded, and many of your viewers may be aware that in Brighton there is an annual memorial, but there was also the Brighton Pavilion that served as a hospital for many of those that came back wounded and in incredibly high numbers. But in terms of a time frame, we are hoping that within the next couple of years, so by 2024, we will be in a position to unveil the memorial, the National Sikh War Memorial, and we're hoping that come next year, when we put in our full planning application, that with the support of the likes of your good selves, many others within media, within politics, on a cross-party basis, we owe it to those who made that ultimate sacrifice. And I think it will be a great way to celebrate the diversity within the armed forces, because those armed forces that served during the First and Second World War are very reflective of the community of the Britain, the modern day Britain that we live in today. And
Tan Desi, I was going to thank you very much indeed for coming on this morning and sharing the work that you're doing. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Yeah.
Now, Phil,
it's a great campaign as well, isn't it? And I'm very pleased to be supporting Tan in that campaign.
Now, I've got some more views here that are coming in thick and fast. James says, I joined the Conservatives in 1997. I have now joined Reform UK on issues because of the migrant crisis in action and ousting of Boris. And that goes exactly back to that People poll, Matt Goodwin, and what he was saying, upsetting those.
Tony says the same thing. I voted Conservative in 2019, and I will be looking at a third-party alternative. I won't be voting Conservative, Labour or Liberal. If I can't find a home for my vote, it will be none of the above. But at the moment, Reform is the favourite.
And here's one from Pete. Peter says, please can someone explain to me how a person on a gantry 30 foot above a motorway can stop traffic and cause chaos? These gantries are used regularly by workers for maintenance, but traffic is not stopped when that takes place. We need to find that out. Very good point, Pete.
Yeah, and Thomas says, I could find huge savings for the NHS overnight by scrapping HS2, which you mentioned earlier, and sacking all those diversity managers. It's hard to believe that we're actually paying six-figure sums on non-jobs while we're short of doctors and nurses. I think many people would agree with that, Thomas. Anyway, keep those views coming in. Now, American entrepreneur Palmer Luckey has created a virtual reality headset that intentionally kills people.
Nerve Gear is a system that aims to closely tie people's virtual life to their reality, meaning if someone dies whilst playing a game, they will also be killed in real life at the same time.
Well, to discuss this, what seems like an absurd creation to me, further, we're now joined by technology journalist Will Guyot. Will, this can't be right, can it? That you get killed in a Second Life or whatever in a reality game, and it kills you in real life too. Is that really the case?
I'm left scratching my head over this, and just because a billionaire can invent something doesn't mean people want to buy it, I think is the clearest place to start. Just to explain what's happened here, Palmer Luckey sold Oculus to Mark Zuckerberg for $2 billion back in 2014. He's had quite a lot of free time on his hands, I think it would be fair to say. He's a big fan of this Japanese book series, online role-playing game called Sword Art Online. And the idea of that particular game is, and it's a fictional thing, you cannot escape the game because there's a killer in the real world trying to kill you and you have a headset. So he's basically, in his spare time of an evening, sat in his front room, come up with the idea that people might want to buy an actual virtual reality headset that could kill you with essentially several shots of a nerve agent. And it doesn't exist. He's created mock-up renders of it so that it looks like a headset with almost like 3 shotgun cartridges attached to the front of it. What this does actually does a lot of harm for the video games industry, in my view. Now, people might pat him on the back for being a creator to make it, but this sets back the argument about video games violence and video games companies and organizations being responsible by many years. And that's the problem. We've been getting to a stage where video games are now properly regulated. You have to have a British Board of Film Classification certificate or a PEGI rating in order to have them. But when I saw this story, I fell off my chair because I cannot think of anybody who would want to do something like this. It's not something that we haven't got to this next level of society yet where people want to kill themselves in video games as well as real life. It makes no sense to me at all.
Well, I'm with you. I actually felt sick to the stomach when I was reading this. I mean, we've heard in the past, Russian roulettes or whatever, but this was just beyond comprehension. And then obviously you come up with, well, how could this ever come to market? How could anybody even, get it processed? And then I read other things that this Palmer Luckey was trying to do is you couldn't remove the headset. They were working out the technology that once you put it on and basically you were in with the game, and couldn't remove the headset either. So it was certain death, as it were, if you don't win the game.
Yeah. I think framing this, and it's important because I think it's the most ridiculous idea I've ever heard of, and I've been covering technology for a lot of years. The virtual reality headset, I've got one here. They're becoming more and more usable, and this is a new one that Meta have launched themselves. But the idea of using that to kill myself is not something that I could even possibly entertain. The idea of video gaming and video gaming responsibly is something that I advocate. I feel quite strongly that he's just created this. It's a joke, but it's got publicity because he's so well known globally. The idea of video games pursuing this kind of life or death thing is just not somewhere where I think people want to be.
He needs help.
Are best when they're escapism.
He needs medical help.
Well,
I think he just might do. He can afford it.
This is obviously an extreme example, but this idea of people living a sort of a different life. I mean, there used to be something called Second Life. I don't know if it still exists or not, where people could sort of in effect live a different life in virtually. I actually went to visit them in America as part of a select committee trip years ago, when I still didn't understand it after I'd visited them any more than I did before I got there. But I mean, how widespread is this kind of thing of people trying to live a different life online?
Well, listen, you're completely ahead of the game, because that Second Life concept is what Mark Zuckerberg is trying to bring back as the metaverse. It's the idea that we're all going to want to live together, hang out together in a different world to the real world. And like I said, I love technology. I embrace it. I've worked in the video games industry. I've worked in tech for 20 years. I could think of nothing worse than pretending to be somebody else in a virtual world for the remaining time that I'm not already using a computer. And this is essentially what's coming. But thankfully, if you look at the numbers, if you look at Meta's stocks this week, the stock price has absolutely fallen because all of the investors in that company are saying, you might be believing the metaverse is the future, Mark Zuckerberg. Nobody else is currently buying it at the moment. And that's the challenge. And that's why they've laid off 11,000 people, because he's got this vision that it's the future of the internet. Quite a lot of sensible people are going, no, this is not the future of the internet.
Will, can I ask you one final quick question there? I was reading in the papers today about Twitter and Elon Musk there, saying now that Twitter might become a bank. It's not working. They haven't got the people, online. Doesn't make any money. And he now might turn it into a bank. Just a quick answer if you can update us.
Elon Musk does not know what he's doing with Twitter. He might be the world's richest man, but he has no clue what he's doing with that company. I hope it survives. Lord knows if it will at the moment. And Tesla owners of people who are driving Teslas, and the Tesla share price, that's tanked too, because they want him running one business, not trying to run several badly.
Will, thank you very much indeed for joining us and talking about that. It's funny, actually, Second Life. I know the police sometimes used to hunt paedophiles on Second Life, because if there were paedophiles on Second Life, there were probably paedophiles in real life. And, I mean, it's a bizarre...
It was a form of detection.
It's a bizarre world.
Well,
anyway,
there you go. It can be used for good, not
exactly.
all over.
Well, anyway, that's it for the first hour this morning, but don't go anywhere. We'll be back after this short break.
Morning, I'm Alex Deakin. The weekend has started mild and it will continue that way. Not as windy out there today compared to the last couple of days, and there is some fog around, dense fog in a few spots too. This is the big picture: high pressure to the east, low to the west, and we're kind of in between, with this weather front straddling across central areas, pushing northwards through the day. So a damp start for Northern Ireland, southern and central Scotland, but that rain is going to edge its way clear. There is some fog around that may take a few hours to clear, and for some it could just stay grey all day, particularly parts of northeast England and northern Scotland. But for most of us, it is going to brighten up through the day, and we'll see some spells of sunshine. Still a bit breezy in the west, but not as windy as yesterday. It is still very mild. With a bit of sunshine, temperatures getting up into the high teens perhaps, and even where it's grey, we'll see temperatures into the teens. This evening, it stays largely dry and fine, but it could turn quite misty again quite quickly, especially over central and eastern parts of England. Some dense patches of fog are possible that, again, could linger for much of Sunday. Still a bit breezy in the west, keeping skies a little clear here, and again, for most, it is going to be a very mild night, with most towns and cities staying in double digits. The details for Sunday, well, again, likely to start pretty drab, misty, murky, even foggy. That mist and fog will take a while to clear over eastern counties of England. Some will stay gloomy all day. Further west, a weather front will eventually bring some rain into the west of Northern Ireland, although I suspect Belfast will stay dry until dusk. Elsewhere tomorrow, most places, again, seeing some sunny spells, and it is going to be mild, even where it's cloudy, 13 or 14, with some sunshine. Temperatures, again, getting into the high teens. Could be quite foggy for Monday morning's commute, but we will see a change through next week, turning wet on Tuesday, turning less warm, but still around average.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
for helping our great nation.
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV.
On radio.
And online.
we're proud to be
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Stein Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Stein Show.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dubes & Co. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Dubes & Co.
Good morning and welcome back to Saturday Morning with Esther and Philip. Coming up this hour,
we'll be answering the age-old question of whether a man is still expected to pay on a first date in this day and age, and the answer is yes.
No. We will be discussing a worrying investigation looking into the level of abuse received by MPs on social media.
And Just Stop Oil have halted their protests on the M25, but for how long?
And keep those views coming in. Email us on gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet us at gbnews. But before we start with this hour, here are your latest headlines with Tamsin.
Philip, thank you. Good morning from the GB newsroom. It's 11 o'clock. There have been scenes of jubilation across Ukraine after the liberation of the city of Kherson from Russian control. Kherson was the only regional capital city captured by Russian troops since the invasion began in February. Vladimir Putin's spokesperson has denied the move is a defeat, saying the region remains part of Russian territory after it was annexed in September. Ukraine's Foreign Minister, Dmytro Kuleba, says there isn't a single indicator that Russia is sincerely seeking peace talks.
The only response we always received from them, even when we sat down at the table, was, here is the list of ultimatums, take it or leave it. And the set of these ultimatums meant full capitulation and unconditional surrender of Ukraine.
World leaders have scrapped the so-called family photo for their upcoming G20 summit. They're refusing to be pictured alongside President Putin or his representatives after unanimously condemning Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Putin has confirmed he'll skip the summit altogether due to a schedule requiring him in Russia. The Prime Minister is considering cuts to defence spending amid rising inflation when he unveils his budget next week. The 2019 Conservative manifesto pledged to increase the defence budget by at least 0.5% above inflation every year. The department is expected to get a cash funding increase, but it's been suggested in real terms this will be devalued by inflation, which currently stands at 10%. Former chief economist at the Cabinet Office, Jonathan Portes, told GB News he thinks cuts to public spending is the wrong move.
The UK clearly does need tax rises for fiscal sustainability because we need to finance a decent quality public services. That doesn't necessarily mean we need to do that all right away. And it certainly doesn't mean we need to cut public spending, which in my view would be, in general, quite the wrong thing to do.
The Chancellor is being urged to extend the 5p cut in fuel duty, which was set to remain in place until March next year. The AA is pushing for the extension amid the high costs for motorists. They say petrol is over 2p a litre more expensive than just before the fuel duty cut. Their latest research also shows more than 70% of drivers are being deterred from going electric amid rising electricity prices. Counting continues in the US midterm elections with the race for control of the US Congress neck and neck. Republicans are favourites to win the House of Representatives, securing 211 seats. They need an additional 7 seats to secure a majority. But the fight for the Senate is on the edge, with both Republicans and Democrats having 49 votes. The biggest concerns for voters are the economy and abortion. The royal family will gather for the annual Royal British Legion Festival of Remembrance. The event will commemorate the country's war dead and mark the 40th anniversary of the Falklands War. It will also pay tribute to the late Queen and the 70 years of her service to the country and to British Armed Forces. The Women's England rugby team have suffered heartbreak after losing to New Zealand in the World Cup final. England's Red Roses dominated the first half, but their rivals, the Black Ferns, came back strong, scoring a try in the last 9 minutes to give a 34-31 victory. The final broke the record for the biggest attendance for a women's rugby match, with more than 40,000 tickets sold. Fans say despite the loss, they're still proud of the team.
It could have gone either way for quite a lot of the game, so I think in this room everyone was just really passionate about England women and the Loughborough Lightning girls here, so we're all pretty gutted, but we're also really proud of everyone out there. Like, it's a massive honour for them to represent the Rose and put on a great performance like they did today.
Renowned graffiti artist Banksy has revealed his latest artwork on the side of a damaged building in Ukraine. It shows a female gymnast balancing on a damaged building. Murals spotted in and around Kyiv have led to speculation the artist is working in the war-torn country. Another, not officially claimed, shows a Russian president being flipped during a judo match with a little boy. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens, of course. Now, though, it's back to Esther and Philip.
Thanks, Tamsin. And we're again joined in the studio by Dr. Tessa Donlop and Simon Fanshawe. So going to you, Tessa, for your book or your article.
She's got something better than a story. She's got something better than a story. She's got an entire book here.
I'm combining royal stories with my own royal book because next Sunday would have been the 75th wedding anniversary of Elizabeth and Philip. And 1947, a record-breaking year for marriages. They became the pin-ups for a generation. Girls crashed down the aisle at a naive 22. It was the youngest on record, far younger than the interwar period. Because, of course, the cachet of men had never been higher. Just come back from the front line, you wanted to bag your man. Pretty PDQ. And, of course, the Attlee government, famous for redistribution, but not famous for equality. Girls were literally told in the Beveridge report, get back and breed for Britain. And so I explore all of this
and more. In the papers today, they said marriage has sort of collapsed. Nobody is getting married at all. So there we have, in 75 years, it's gone from thing to do to the thing not to do, but get on
really
with Elizabeth and Philip.
Yeah, and it's a little
Ideal
gift.
Christmas present.
I know, and I'm going to sign this one to you, the perfect married couple.
Thank you very much indeed.
We're not going for 75 years.
Love can come late.
No. Available in all good bookshops.
Thank you very much.
Now,
and now we'll go to the royal stories. Do you want of the day?
Go on.
Because, of course, the Queen's used her final honours lift. It's the headline in the Telegraph, highlights the fact that she's used her final honours lift to applaud black women. Fluella Benjamin, my generation, we all grew up with her, looking through the round window. And, of course, Professor Dame Elizabeth I knew I was going to stumble there. I was trying to get a smooth run at it. Professor Dame Elizabeth Anionwu, who is the most glorious, not only a professor of nursing, but also hugely influential behind the campaign to get the Mary Seacole statue. So those are the two black women. But, of course, other really significant players also been listed in this order of merit. Margaret Macmillan, fabulous historian, establishment historian, but nonetheless great. And, almost controversially, Sir David Anjay, and he was, or is rather, the architect who designed the Smithsonian Museum, of course, but also, interestingly, a man who was vocally critical of our current king for interfering and using, quote, his position of privilege to criticise plans for buildings in London. And yet, the late Queen recognises him.
I've almost got a tear in my eye to think that this woman, right, worked, as we know, as she sort of greeted in Liz Truss, worked to the last moment, and all of this preparation that she'd done for her death. So we saw that funeral, how she wanted to be laid next to her husband again. She's done her honours list. I mean, it was unbelievable. She was on like a machine, wasn't she? Just work.
But also, she just had such an incredible antennae. This list is Broadchurch. Her final outgoing statement is, I am Broadchurch. She was born into the pinnacle of aristocracy. She came of age under the Attlee government, and she managed to hold all those perspectives together. And I think these 6 people, because, of course, there can only ever be 24, and you're only allowed into this order once someone else has died, shuffled along. So that's 6 new players.
Now, I've got a couple of stories here. I try and find some lighter stories on a Saturday. One that caught my eye is page 23 of the Daily Mirror, where the dementia test, they're dropping the question, who's the Prime Minister, to test whether somebody's got dementia.
Well, that seems reasonable, doesn't it?
Because it's changed so many times, they've decided that's now an unfair question. Well, the one I particularly liked, I'm a huge fan of Carry On films. It's my favourite sense of humour, and there's an article in...
Passing this week as well of...
Yes, Leslie Phillips died this week, the old ding-dong and all the rest of it. Daily Star, page 15, there's a story here. It's called A Passage to Innuendo, which I quite like. It's a hiker who's completed the UK's rudest walk after trekking 326 miles from his home in Cockermouth to Lickey End. Oh, God. And on this trip, he conquered places such as Great Cockup, Little Cockup, Andrews Knob, Nanny's Breast, Knob End Nature Reserve and Bottoms Reservoir. And apparently it's an official thing. He lives in Cockermouth and his brother lives in Lickey End, and he decided it would be fun to do this. And he's done it for charity, for Baggy Trousers UK, a testicular cancer charity. But
why is it we all giggle at things like this, irrespective of age?
Absolutely terrific stuff.
It's one way, if you're in a group of English-speaking people in which there are Canadians, Americans and Brits, the one way to tell who are the Brits is just to say the word bottom. And everybody else, the Canadians, the Americans, excuse me.
You do not think it's slightly because we have quite strict broadcast rules about what we can and can't say, and so anything near the edge...
I've probably just broken them all there,
I thought you walked the line, but it's one of the
Thank
things
you.
I've got against podcasts. I don't like it when they F and blind in my ear, however good the podcast is. I quite like our old-fashioned broadcasting style.
But it's also, it's just that innuendo.
Yeah.
It is the carry-on.
Saucy postcard.
It is the, I don't know, the pantomime at Christmas. So it's not rude and it's not vulgar. It's just a little, as Ken Dodd would say, a little titter.
Yeah.
Cheered me up anyway.
Well, I'll never forget seeing Biggins on stage playing Dick Whittington's mother and getting an entire theatre to stand up shouting, "We love Dick."
That's also a famous line of
People
Margaret
just
Thatcher.
screaming with laughter.
Yeah. See, I think that underlines my point. You don't need to go the...
exactly, I agree
full
with
mile.
you.
You don't need to say big, flash swear
I love
words.
Ken Dodd, and Ken Dodd was one of those people he didn't have to use profanities.
Well, there's also...
But the Margaret Thatcher line was Willie Whitelaw, wasn't it?
Everyone needs a Willie.
Yes, every woman needs a Willie.
I'm not sure she understood.
No, you
joke. But do you remember Eric Morecambe used to do this? There's that sense of, and I think you're partly right, Tess, this thing. It's about breaking the constraints. So Eric Morecambe used to do that thing of say, can we say that? Can we say that to sort of some imaginary authority figure? And that does make it much funnier. There's no doubt about it. But it is also a sign of sexual repression, don't you think?
Yes, and Britain is famously sexually
we're
repressed.
famously sexually repressed, and we're all,
Oh, right. Well, there you go.
straining.
Don't look like that.
Naturism has taken off in this country.
Well, they're taking everything off, aren't they?
Yes. Fanar,
Anyway,
and the trouble is...
Simon, a bit of culture from you, if you don't mind.
Once you get onto Planet, or double entendre, you can't get off. See what I mean? All right, let's just grow up. For goodness sake, children. No, I caught this story. This is The Sun. I don't read The Sun except when I come in and do this show. But do you remember the Rachel Nickell murder? So there was a young woman murdered on Wimbledon Common, and then there was a honey trap set up, and then they got this guy called Colin Stagg, and he was convicted, and then 13 months later he was out of prison because he was falsely convicted, and then eventually this other guy, Robert Napper, and they used DNA tests and da-da-da. But the guy who was involved in setting up the honey trap and did the profiling is this man called Professor Paul Britton, who's a forensic, whatever he's called, a forensic scientist of some sort. And what he did was he basically cautioned against the police's conviction that Colin Stagg was guilty, but he never spoke up and he never allowed it to happen. And so Colin Stagg has always blamed him for not speaking up, more than he blames the police. So for a documentary, they've brought the two together. The reason I'm partly interested in this is that I've got an enduring interest. There's a wonderful project called the Forgiveness Project. So if you're having a terrible day, go on theforgivenessproject.com, and there are these extraordinary stories of people who've dealt with all sorts of things. I mean, their kids dying, murder, rape. I mean, terrible things that have happened. But the ways in which, all the different stories and the ways in which people have found their way through it. Some forgiveness, some not. It's a question, not an answer, forgiveness. So what's interesting to me about this is what happens when people, this guy, Colin Stagg, is saying, Paul Britton ruined my life, and yet he met him, and he didn't expect to, and then he found himself thinking, actually, he's all right. But he says, I no longer hate him. I don't trust him completely. He's an expert manipulator, and agreeing to meet me was for his benefit, not mine. On the other hand, he says, but I moved towards him. And I just find that process, it's not a simple process. There's no obligation to do it. But the idea that you explore that is one way of finding a future rather than being trapped in a situation.
And there's a handshake there as well, isn't there? Shaking hands there.
Yeah, well, photographers always do that. I mean, I know Joe Berry, whose father was murdered in the Brighton bomb, and Pat McGee, who planted the bomb. And I've moderated their conversation in public a few times now. And photographers always do the same thing and say, oh, go on, Pat, put your arm round him. And you go, no, you're misunderstanding what this is about. I tell you what it's about. It's about hearing. It's not about agreeing, it's about hearing.
But isn't it also quite a lot of evidence to suggest that if people meet their victims, if criminals meet their victims, and if there can be some kind of relationship or at least conversational communication, it helps. I think some people who have been born without empathy or brought up in broken environments understand the impact of their actions, and that can help rehabilitation.
I think as well, if you haven't been able to move on, you know, if you're the person who's aggrieved and you haven't been able to move, and you're seeking this maybe resolution, I think that could be a way to come to an end. I think it might be who it is, because what you wouldn't want is to have somebody like a double abuse. They meet this person, there's no sympathy, there's no empathy. You're thinking you're going for a conclusion, they slap you in the face, and then you think, oh my goodness, I've had a double slap.
It speaks to I wrote a book too.
I know I was going to say that.
Called The Power of Difference, and I put Joe and
Difference.
Pat's story in there. And what I did was I looked at the transcript of the interviews that I've done with them. The word "hear" occurs about every 2 or 3 minutes. I heard him, I hear, I listen. And what's really, and I think it speaks to contemporary politics, is that what happens in these situations is what's crucial is that people are heard. You can't agree about a murder, but you can hear each other and then try and understand. And so the push these days, and so much campaigning, is towards total agreement. You can't make progress. No relationship, you two are married, no relationship could exist on total agreement. You have to hear it and then find a way of being together.
Oh, I don't know. Phil agrees with me on everything.
I always agree with you. It saves time.
But this one thing here, I was going to move on to this, thankfully. This online poll, it was the Express poll. And what they were looking at is what did people think, the general public think, about all of these world leaders and showbiz people flying to COP27? What should they have done? And 82%, so they all said that they should have done it online. It shouldn't have flown out. 11% said it was right to go ahead, but the vast bulk said no, they shouldn't. And what I'm hoping, going back to your point there, is that these leaders who are talking about this hear what the public are saying. And actually, if you know, you have got to walk the walk, and if you're talking about the environment and, you know, carbon dioxide emissions, then please do it online, or at least hear the request.
Can we just talk about the environment very briefly? We were talking about the menopause earlier and hot vests. I mean, it is hot out there. I'm not even wearing gloves on my bicycle yet. It's properly warm. What I don't understand when you drill into statistics, I don't think your party, the Tory party, will ever fully embrace the environment until older voters care politically, see it as a political issue. All the polling says that only 25% of older voters, when I say older voters, over 55, consider the environment a political issue.
Well,
why is that?
And I don't believe that at all.
You don't believe, but it's a fact. It's a polling fact.
That is a fact at all. I mean,
well, it's about the environment's a big subject.
It is a big subject. It's farming, it's environment, it's road.
But anyway, we've
got to move on.
I've put the catamaran pigeons there.
We must move on. We want Tessa and Simon to stay for this section, because we're asking the age-old dating question of who should be picking up the bill on a first date.
A woman has gone viral this week after retelling a story about how her first date insisted that the bill should be split, despite bragging about how much money he makes throughout the year. Stupid thing to do.
But is it right that a man should pay, even if he earns more than a woman, or should splitting a bill on a first date become the new norm in 2022?
Well, joining us now is a dating expert and love coach, Belinda Love Rygear. So, come on, first dates, who should be footing the bill if you want to go to a second date?
It's really such a light-hearted question, but I do truly believe that it's very fundamental, and I think there's no cookie-cutter answer. I think it's unique to the individual. Each relationship should start out with clear communication. And did you know that the top 4 reasons for divorce or separation in a relationship is due to money issues or arguments over money? So for me personally, I truly believe that it's up to the individual. There are some people who like to provide on a date, some people who like to be provided for. And with the rise in feminism, I think equality is something that people are looking for as well. And I think clear communication early in a relationship.
Hearing, going back there, hearing. Tessa, what were you saying there? You were shaking your head.
I think it's hardwired. I genuinely believe that my husband loves me more if I'm earning less than him. My earnings go up and down because I'm a freelancer.
Why?
And on bad
you could just lie and have an extra account and put all your money in runaway
because it
money.
makes him feel there is something wired into the man, isn't there? A bit of a machismo that you like. Are you denying?
He's obviously not from Yorkshire. I can tell you, I'd want Esther to earn as much money as possible. I'm from Yorkshire, and if she can pay more of the bills, yes, absolutely.
No, to be fair, he's a much more modern man than you'd give him credit for. Really, there's lots of things he's got very strict views on, and that will be crime, and that will be the immigrant. That's very, very solid views, but otherwise, on things like that, equality, he's very broad-minded.
Belinda, I want to know, obviously at the moment we're going through a bit of a cost of living crisis and energy bills and all that stuff, and in a male and female relationship, who tends to be the tightest between a man and a woman? I mean, who's the one who tends to be the most extravagant and who tends to be the tightest?
I think that it depends on the individual. I think there are some high-income earning women in relationships and some high-income earning men. I think it's not a cookie-cutter answer. I think you need to communicate and be clear with one another how the relationship is going to move forward financially.
I'm going to bring Simon here so he doesn't feel excluded there.
Number one, if I went on a date with somebody who spent the entire date bragging about how much money they earned, what I would do is say, I've got to go to the loo now, and I would leave the restaurant and they could have the bill. It's a bit like going on a date with somebody who says, I'm really into Genesis, but only the early albums. Make a quick decision and you leave. Number two, I accept this is about men and women going out to dinner, but actually what happens when it's two men or two women? And I remember there's Ellen DeGeneres, not somebody of whom I'm hugely fond, but she did do a very funny joke when somebody said to her about lesbians, who's the man and who's the woman? She said, that's like asking two chopsticks, which is the knife and which is the fork. I mean, the point about it is that you should make a decision, shouldn't you? And on all bills, you should make a decision. But I earn more than my husband, and we by and large, split the bills proportionately because that's fair.
But but when you say here, and going back to that, if somebody is bragging about what they're earning, then you're hearing them talking about money. So you are thinking it is them that's going to pay. So I would have been listening, would have been expecting that. But Belinda there. So again, who looking for the tight what in a relationship, right? Oh, it's so, isn't it? Now, how do you then deal with that? You've got to be happy with that. And I saw you pointing at me.
No.
That was a bit mean.
It was a flinch.
I think that by having clear communication, so for example, if your partner is taking you out to 5-star restaurants and you don't earn a similar money amount as they do, you can't expect them to be constantly trying to keep up with you. It will cause resentment, bitterness, insecurity around the relationship. Eventually, the relationship will end. I think that discussing it, coming up with a solution that you're both happy with. And one thing that I really focus on is expectations. The word expectation needs to be removed, because if we expect people to do things, then we're leading us up for failure or setting us up for failure. I think we need to understand our values and be in alignment with those values and rediscuss as it comes up in the relationship.
Belinda, that's what we'll be doing now. We'll be discussing, realigning, and see if we're still together next week. So, Belinda, thank you very much indeed for joining us today. And, of course, to Tessa and Simon as well for staying with us and doing that. And we'll hopefully see you shortly.
Coming up, we'll be discussing Just Stop Oil after they announce a halt in their protests to give the government time to do the right thing. Don't go anywhere.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here. You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join me, Arlene Foster, for the briefing on GB News. Every Friday at 3 p.m, I'll give you all the latest political news and analysis, and we'll have robust live debate. To make sure that you're caught up on all of the biggest issues of the day, we'll bring on experts in their field. I'll ask the questions that you'd like to ask. We're not afraid to tackle discussions from all perspectives, including yours. Don't forget, the briefing with me, Arlene Foster, every Friday at 3 p.m. on GB News.
Hello, I'm Alastair Stewart, and I'd invite you to join me at noon on Saturdays and Sundays for Alastair Stewart and Friends. I've been in this business for over 40 years. Now, here at GB News, I've never been happier. I get to choose the big stories that really interest me. We hear what you have to say, and you hear what I have to say. I really hope you can join me, noon on Saturdays and Sundays.
It's 11:26. Where is this morning disappearing to? Well, I tell you where you've been hot on your email here. Rachel says, because we were talking about the main parties, where they're disappearing and new emerging parties coming in, and she says the Reform Party were the only party against lockdown. They warned us of the impact of shutting the economy down. We're in a mess because of lockdown and Rishi's furlough. That's Rachel there.
Some of us also warned about the...
Well, we did.
About it,
we did.
There's quite a lot of people who...
Voice in the wilderness.
Yes, we were. There are lots of actually people commenting about this. Pauline says, my husband and I are seriously considering joining the Reform Party. Having both been supporters of the Conservative Party, voting them for many years, we are going to give the Reform Party a chance.
And Ian says, how does hollowing out the civil service and other deep cuts in the autumn statement help you when you want the Home Office to process those asylum applicants, more than 1.5 per week, and help the that's per person, help the unemployed find work? So
lots of comments about the dating and who should pay on a first date, and some disagreement, some violent disagreement here. George says, even more important to pay on the first date as a man these days to show you aren't part of the effeminate woke losers. I mean, real dates, not Tinder and all that nonsense. But not only pay the bill, but pull a chair out, open the door for us, stand on the street side as you walk. Basics, man up. But Jean says, no, women want to be equal, so split the bill.
Keep your views coming in. They certainly keep us on our toes and amused.
Absolutely. Now, yesterday it was announced that Just Stop Oil activists will halt their protests on the M25 with immediate effect.
Members of the organisation have been blocking the motorway for 4 days, leading to mass disruption and multiple arrests. And the pause is to allow the government time to do the right thing.
But they might want to pause.
I know the irony.
Anyway, the police have said that the pause will enable them to focus their resources on other crimes.
Joining us is the writer and broadcaster Emma Webb to discuss this. I mean, unbelievable, these eco-zealots, so out of touch with the public. I think it's 90% out of touch. 10% might be supporting them. Emma, what are your views?
GB News' very own Andrew Doyle tweeted yesterday suggesting that interview with a lady called Indigo Rumbelow, that he thought that might actually be satire. And I think that's where we're at now, that these, there's a slightly amusing aspect to a lot of these interviews that you see with these activists, because they do seem so hysterical to the point of satire. But there is a really worrying aspect to this. And, you know, my research background began in extremism, researching particularly Islamist extremism. And when I look at these people, I'm seeing so many of the signs associated with extremism. The fact that if you look at these interviews, like I mentioned, that one with Indigo, you see that they're increasingly unable to engage with interviewers in any rational way. They just provide these sound bites that they seem to have picked up from elsewhere and then put together in a kind of pastiche, which is one of the reasons why I think they come across as being so satirical. The fact that their attitude, as you've just mentioned, by having this pause on their protests, is really that, you know, unless you meet our demands, we will continue taking hostages. This is a fundamentally anti-democratic movement, and they are willing to literally put people's lives at risk and to break the law in pursuit of their highly ideological goals. And I think that that's very concerning, because that is really teetering on the brink of something that could turn very, very nasty.
Emma, I just wondered, I mean, you know, as far as I'm concerned, these people are lunatics. I want to get that out there straight away. But trying to be sympathetic to them, I mean, should we not be a bit more understanding? Because, I mean, it's a bit like during COVID when the government employed a deliberate strategy to put the fear of God into people, and then there was no wonder that people got very extreme over what COVID measures should be in place because the government had, in effect, force them down that route. Is the same not been happening with all of this sort of net zero and climate change and all the rest of it? That in effect we've got the government basically saying how catastrophic the consequences are going to be if we don't tackle climate change. We've got all this, I mean, what goes on in schools and universities is probably even more extreme. And so there's no good, it's no good anyone belly aching at the end of it when people leave and come out and start doing these things, because the government and schools and universities have been basically indoctrinating them with this stuff for years.
I agree. I think a huge amount of fear has been whipped up, and all you have to do is look at the founder of Extinction Rebellion, Hallam, his comments suggesting that at the end of the world, and this really has been compared to an apocalyptic doomsday cult, that what people will see is that they'll have their homes invaded and their terrible things, I won't say it because it's morning weekend television, terrible things will happen to their families if nothing is done about this, and that everybody is at risk of extinction. And I think that this has whipped up a huge amount of fear in young people. And I say young people, but I use that lightly because a lot of the people that we've seen interviewed in the last week or so are around 25 or 28. That isn't very much younger than me. And yet they seem to be behaving like people in their mid-teens. Now, I'm not suggesting that any specific...
Emma Webb, I totally agree with that. We're just heading to the news and we'll have you back on the show because I think this is going to go on for some time and you've absolutely been following this with keen interest. So, Emma, thank you for joining us. And what Emma was saying there, I was watching some of those tweets and comments of those young people up on the gantries. It was like histrionics. It was like young children having a tantrum, but they were absolutely distraught. We are going to die. I could not. They actually needed, I think, sort of medical attention and support. So I do think the people who are running Stop the Oil and Extinction Rebellion are exploiting vulnerable people. Anyway, we want to hear from you. What do you think about Stop the Oil? Are they exploiting vulnerable people? But coming up, we'll be joined by Labour MP Naz Shah to discuss the shocking scale of abuse received by MPs online. But first, it's time for your news headlines with Tamsin.
Esther, thank you. It's 11:33. Here's the latest from the GB newsroom. There have been scenes of jubilation across Ukraine after the liberation of the city of Kherson from Russian control. Kherson was the only regional capital city captured by Russian troops since the invasion began in February. The British Ministry of Defence says the withdrawal brings significant reputational damage to Moscow. Vladimir Putin's spokesperson has denied the move is a defeat, saying the region remains part of Russian territory after it was annexed in September. The Prime Minister is considering cuts to defence spending amid rising inflation when he unveils his budget next week. The 2019 Conservative manifesto pledged to increase the defence budget by at least 0.5% above inflation every year. The department is expected to get a cash funding increase, but it's been suggested in real terms this will be devalued by inflation, which currently stands at 10%. The Chancellor is being urged to extend the 5p cut in fuel duty, which was set to remain in place until March next year. The AA is pushing for the extension amid the high costs for motorists. They say petrol was over 2p a litre more expensive just before the fuel duty cut. The women's England rugby team have suffered heartbreak after losing to New Zealand in the World Cup final. England's Red Roses dominated the first half, but their rivals, the Black Ferns, came back strong, scoring a try in the last 9 minutes to give a 34-31 victory. The final broke the record for the biggest attendance for a women's rugby match, with more than 40,000 tickets sold. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Don't go anywhere, though. Back to Esther and Philip in just a moment.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Friday and Sunday night from 9, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
We're on the same page again. There's something good happening.
Let Ian finish. Don't be such a cranky. That mini budget was the tip of the iceberg.
And on Saturday, my show just got bigger. From 8, it's Mark Dolan's Saturday Night In.
You can't govern a country if you can't speak.
Stop talking. My God, we reached the end. I've never been early in my life. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. There's never been a more interesting but also critical time in British politics, and I can't wait to bring you the biggest stories of the day with the best factual accuracy and also a few of my own opinions thrown in. We'll engage in passionate but always polite debate with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Monday to Thursday, 10 till 12 on TV, on radio and online.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Welcome back. It's 11:37. Got loads of your views here, Phil.
Yeah, Philip, not me, but another Philip, says the delicate souls being subjected to bullying should have to spend 6 months or so in an industrial environment. This criteria should apply to all government, civil servants and politicians. Let them spend time in the real world before being elected and employed.
And Martin says, as a lifelong Conservative voter, I will not be voting for them at the next general election, but reform instead. We don't need tax increases, crippling more already struggling people. We need low taxes to attract investment and create growth. Exorbitant net zero is also a con and costing domestic energy users far too much.
And Alan agrees. What happened to cutting the green levy and VAT on energy, raising the personal allowance and cutting fuel duty? Why are business rates and corporate tax not being cut? How will we ever get growth if none of these are done? and the linking of electricity prices and gas prices is not reformed.
And the last one for the moment, Ian said the problem that the police have with the protesters is that they have a duty of care for them once they attend because of the Human Rights Act. The roads have to be closed to protect the officers dealing with that situation. Thank you very much indeed. But now, God is an entrepreneur. He wants you to be one too. That's according to author and broadcaster Matt Bird, who has spoken of the need for ongoing job creation and enterprise as the country struggles against the cost of living crisis.
Right in the Times, Matt said the need has never been greater to help people start new businesses as a lasting solution to financial hardship.
Well, we're delighted to say that Matt Bird joins us now. So, God is an entrepreneur. Explain.
Oh, thank you, Esther. Great. Well, God created the universe according to people of faith. So if he is a creator and we're created like him, we're also made to create and innovate and enterprise. So I believe that we all have a spirit of enterprise within us and are able to create new things and start new businesses.
Matt, I read your article in the Times. I thought there was a controversial comment, which was government and charity will never solve poverty, I think is what I read, and that you sort of made the point that only enterprise and businesses will. And I think you used the quote, which I thought was a good one, about, you know, if you give a person a fish, you feed them for the day. If you teach them how to fish, you feed them for life. I just wondered, you know, why that kind of view is such a minority one in something like the Church of England.
I'm not sure it is actually, Philip, because we all know that charities are always in need of more resources to help more people. A government is always in the need of more taxes to help more people. So whether you can fundraise well or you're a government and can tax a lot, actually it never solves economic hardship. The only lasting solution is actually to help people get jobs and start businesses. And so that little phrase, you know, give a person a fish, you feed them for the day, teach a person to fish and you feed them for life. I mean, that's what it's all about.
And you go around the world, as well as in this country, into churches, sort of explaining how you could set up a business or enterprise. How does it go down your courses?
Well, it goes down really well. I'm in France at the moment, where I'm speaking at a conference for hundreds of people from churches who are interested in helping people in their communities start small businesses, because it is the only lasting solution to financial challenges. And during this cost of living crisis, you know, we need to be generative. We need to be imaginative. You know, we can't just expect charity to do more and government to do more all the time. We have to kind of take this challenge and grab hold of it and see what we can do to actually create jobs for others.
Do other churchgoers agree with you, or sometimes are they taken aback with your view and position?
Well, I wrote a year and a half ago in the Times about this same issue, and I thought I might get some negative reaction, but I didn't find anybody who reacted badly. Everybody said this is exactly what we need to do, and that's what inspired me to write the book, The Spirit of Enterprise, which is a 7-session course which helps churches and other faith organisations to help people in the community start a business. I mean, lots of big businesses in the world started at kitchen tables and garden sheds and, you know, garages. I mean, we all start somewhere, so why not through local churches and community organisations?
It seems that even the Conservative Party, that's always sort of been pro-business, and that they seem so reluctant to make the moral case for business-friendly policies and maybe, you know, lower taxes for businesses. Do you get surprised that conservative or so-called conservative politicians are so afraid to make that moral case?
Well, politicians aren't entrepreneurs, are they? So I think those of us that are entrepreneurs can always make a stronger, more passionate case for the opportunity that enterprise creates. So I'm not disappointed by politicians. I think we just need less red tape, and it needs to be easier for people to start businesses, not just here in the UK, but in France, in Italy, in Spain, across Europe, across the world. Business needs an environment in which it can flourish and thrive, and government just needs to create space for us to do what we do without too much red tape.
Matt Bird, I know you've done Helping Churches Transform Community. I think that was another book of yours, and that's exactly what you're doing. And we want to wish you all the very best. And it's just great to know that God's an entrepreneur. Thank you. Thanks for joining us today.
Now, brand new research has highlighted the shocking scale of abuse received by members of Parliament online, finding that more than 3,000 offensive tweets are sent to MPs on a daily basis.
Labour MP for Bradford West, Naz Shah, is the most targeted politician in her district, with research showing she received almost 5,000 toxic tweets in a 6-week period.
Well, I'm delighted that Naz joins us now. Naz, thank you very much for joining us. People should know that Naz is my next-door neighbour in Parliament. She represents Bradford West, and I'm next door to her in Shipley. Now, in this poll, Naz, I get lots of abuse, and I had 1,200 or so toxic tweets sent to me in that 6-week period. You had 5,000. So why do you think you've been getting so much? Is it because you're a woman? Is it because you're from an ethnic minority? Why do you think you get disproportionately so much abuse?
Well, first of all, thanks, Philip, and it's nice to be with you as your neighbouring MP, and thanks, Esther, for inviting me. So I've had people go to prison. I've won a libel case because of one particular tweet that was from 2017. And there's a suggestion, even on GB, one of your platforms, one of the presenters suggested and reinforced the notion that I suggested that the victims of abuse should shut up for the sake of diversity. Now, that tweet, whenever there's a discussion in right-wing platforms, then my abuse shoots up. So one is linked to that particular tweet. One reason is because I raise issues. I have a large constituency with large diaspora Pakistani communities. I happen to be a Muslim and a woman, and a person of colour. So that contributes to it as well. So there's lots of different reasons. But you and I know, Philip, you're none of those, and yet you get over 1,000 in the same period. So the truth is, as members of Parliament, when we're stepping up to take public office, it's like you said in your quote, there is an expectation now that you've got to develop a thick skin and take it on the chin. But I've had 2 people going to prison for death threats, and it's not okay. And the more we talk about it, the more we raise awareness about it, which is why I'm really grateful to be able to come on your show and talk to your viewers as well.
And of course, there's also the impact on your family as well of what goes on. It's not just to the politician themselves. I mean, has it made you think about quitting politics altogether, this abuse?
Well, my family have certainly suggested as much, and especially when my son, who's now 15, he was 13 when he came home, and he said, "Mum, why do you get so much hate?" And I said, "Look, the day I don't get hate, it'll be meaning I'm not doing my job properly, because part of it is because you're holding particular views, etc. And you can't please everybody as a politician. You have to make a decision of what your politics are, etc. So that automatically makes you, a victim of some of the online trolling. And a lot of the trolling, to be fair, happens anonymously as well. So they're anonymous trolls, or they're out of the country. If I raise issues, they'll be trolling from other places, other parts in the world where you can't get arrests made like I have done in the UK, and the police have intervened. And yes, it does affect the family. My kids do get impacted by it, and they're not on Twitter, they're not on Facebook, so they stay off that. But somebody will screenshot it and put it on Snapchat, and they'll see it on TikTok, so there's no getting away from it. But you've got to carry on, haven't you?
The political discussion even around the world is getting more toxic, getting more polarised. So just a final question. Do you think now we as parliamentarians have to as well take some responsibility, or maybe what we're doing in the chamber, just to show that we do get on with one another and we can talk things through, and the only way there'll be a solution is by talking about the policy and not abusing the person?
Well, I think as parliamentarians and people in positions of leadership, we have to be mindful of our language, because that responsibility belongs to us. But it doesn't help when we have, for example, the idea that, for me as a Labour politician, and the idea that we have an invasion of immigrants, that kind of language for me was straight out of Enoch Powell's Rivers of Blood speech. That was not helpful. It does not help people think about the issue of refugees or asylum seekers, the immigration, how we talk about immigration, and that's really, really toxic. So we, as parliamentarians, absolutely need to take responsibility, because words are powerful. and word, and with leadership comes responsibility, and I'm not sure that everybody in that place takes that responsibility as seriously as they should.
Naz Shah, thank you very much indeed for joining us. It will probably ruin her reputation forever to know that me and Naz get on very well together as neighbouring MPs. We're very good friends, and we might not agree on many things, but we are very good friends, and we need more of that kind of political discourse where we can disagree friendly. Thanks, Naz. Thanks for joining us.
And the reason I say that, going back to 2014, the start of this was the Labour MP who went on to be the Shadow Chancellor, John McDonnell, against me.
Saying that you should be lynched.
Saying I should be lynched, and that, really, I remember that being the very start of it.
And she's never apologised, I might add.
And so it ruffles out or spreads out, so everybody's got to be responsible for what they do. But anyway, it's now time to look instead at some of the biggest stories this week from the world of showbiz and sport. And so we're obviously delighted to be joined by Aidan McGee and Hayley Palmer. Where should we go first, Phil?
Shall we start with Hayley?
Yes, go on.
Good choice.
Yeah. I'm still waiting to see if anyone's got anything good to say about Matt Hancock.
Well, have you been watching this week? Have you seen him do the trials?
I saw the trials.
I mean, everyone keeps voting him, so he's getting more airtime. It's becoming the Matt Hancock show on that basis. If we didn't vote for him, we wouldn't see him so much, but some of the other characters...
Remember what I said last week? Could he become a national treasure? Because everybody would unite, all wanting him to see here, full of gunge and insects, eating all kinds of stuff.
Across badly last night.
Yeah, but I think people don't think they're voting for him. I think by voting for him to do these things, I think they think they're voting against him.
Exactly. We want to see him in ridiculous things. We want to see him get gunge and everything. But he's actually doing quite well. Well, very well. He's got 11 stars.
Would you want to know what I thought about it? Because he was, like, munching through whatever it was, all kinds of horrific stuff, you know, from fish eyes right the way through to parts of animals' anatomies you never even want to hear about. He made what you've usually had in there, celebrities, look a little bit sort of weak, really, because they're having such difficulty doing, and he just, maybe that's our canteen at work, it's that bad. He just wolfed through everything, quite happy to swim through things. So is it not sort of showing the show up a little bit?
I think so, and I think he is the strongest character, and alongside Boy George at the moment, they're the main characters. It's all focused, like I say, the Matt Hancock show at the moment, whether that might change. But he is opening up a little bit more. Like, they are starting to challenge him on things, and he is... you know, taking the time to talk back.
So coming across OK, actually.
That's what I mean. I don't want him to, but the first night he came in with Sean Walsh, I was laughing out loud, and I thought, I don't want to, but why am I laughing? Because it was funny.
Did I not say this and none of you believed us last week? Oh, no, he can't be.
Just Aidan thinks he's coming across well. I wouldn't take that as the last word.
Better than when I interviewed him 5 years ago about cricket, where he absolutely knew nothing at all. I stumped him, you could say.
Now, in terms of... there's quite a lot of non-football sport going on at the moment, isn't there? We've just had... Tamsin's just been telling us on the news about the Women's Rugby World
Big disappointment this morning. 34-31 defeat for England in Auckland against New Zealand.
And they were leading for so much of the game.
Yeah, they were. Look, to be honest with you, I'm not just saying it, but at 14-0, England lost Lydia Thompson to the head clash. It was a sending off. It wasn't entirely an advantage for England because Portia Woodman for New Zealand was lost as well, one of their top players. However, though she was replaced, it was 14-0 then. I'm absolutely certain, given that England were on a 30-match winning run going into it, they've been professional for 3.5 years, as opposed to New Zealand being professional since February of this year. I think England would have won comfortably, and that's why it's a huge disappointment. Because, and it shows as well, though, that the calibre of sport, the calibre of match play, is such that one sending off can make all the difference. If that would have been a few years ago, the better team would have just manoeuvred around it, but you can't. The competition's got so high that you can't get away from it. Nonetheless, the players who did stay on the pitch took it right to the wire. They had a chance right at the end with the line out. As I say, 3 points in it. They did really, really well, and it's done a power of good for women's rugby as well.
And then last night, I was watching the Rugby League World Cup between Australia and New Zealand, which was a cracking match. Men's Rugby League
Can I
World
ask you,
Cup.
do you think it was the best rugby league game ever?
It was.
That's what people are talking about.
It was, as a rugby league aficionado, it was absolutely magnificent.
So how long have you been a rugby league aficionado?
I've been going to watch rugby league matches since I was a little kid.
All right.
And it was brilliant. And now England are playing Samoa this afternoon in the other semi-final.
It's not going to be 66 as it was in the first game. The gap has closed since then. Interesting that it's at the Emirates as well. They've done really well in this tournament, taking it around the whole country. 18 venues. We all know that most of the time it's concentrated in the northwest, isn't it? And Yorkshire. It has the opposite problems with rugby union, which struggles to get into those areas itself. But it's going to the Emirates today, which is good. I don't remember Arsenal ever hosting rugby before, but and then it will all be bearing down to the final next week if England get through. That'll be at Old Trafford.
Now, I don't know if you're a rugby fan, Hayley, no?
Actually, last night I went to a match and it was the rugby players against the football players and the rugby players won 9-2.
Are you more of
15 players?
Are you more of a rugby player or a football player person?
More football.
OK.
I'm not into rugby at all.
Now, I've got a story that I want you to talk about, which Esther's particularly keen on, which is about Cher with her toy boy.
I'm living for this. She's 76, he's 36.
I'm liking that.
But she tweeted, he's treating me like a queen. So does it matter about the age if the man is treating you like a queen? I'm with Cher all the way. She's an icon. She deserves it. I'm glad she's happy. Does he want the fame, the money? What's he after? I mean, maybe they get on really well, but I just think that's
what attracted her to the multi-millionaire?
That's what I mean.
Yeah. You've definitely done a Cher tribute with that biker jacket, though. Yes, I like that.
Turned up on a motorbike.
And I guess
you're a big fan of toy boys, aren't you?
You know, if I have to answer this again, it's the only toy boy anybody's ever had who doesn't look like a toy boy, and that's my other half, Philip Davis.
It
totally is true.
Esther does look younger.
No offence. What do you mean, no offence?
I think you're really
But going back to the... We'll move seats. You can...
No offence, and then you just cause huge...
But you do...
You're so nice to everybody normally as well,
I don't know what's wrong with me at the moment.
Well, man,
But if there is that age difference, I guess you are saying, well, I don't know, where are we going to be in 20 years' time? You know, how, you know, will he be pushing me around in my sort of wheelchair or something? Or what has attracted him to me? Is it my fame? Is it my money? So I'd always be thinking, what does he see in me if I was double
and sometimes
the age?
when the age gap is off, it's like, for me, like, I love my 80s music and stuff. I love people that love the same. Or you like, you know, comedy and stuff. You want the same interest. So eventually, is it going to work? Probably not. But she looks amazing.
I studied it in psychology. Opposites attract doesn't really apply. You need stuff in common. You do.
Okay.
You do need stuff. Oh, I thought you were going to say you totally need something in common. That's what people say. You know, the age difference. You can never bridge because you don't know the same music, the same cultural references, the same anything.
Anyway,
I can't find anyone else keeping
That's all we've got time for. Aidan, thank you very much. Hayley, as always, thank you very much. That's it. That's all we've got time for. But we'll be back at the same time next week. But don't go anywhere, because up next is Alistair Stewart and friends.
Morning, I'm Alex Deakin. The weekend has started mild and it will continue that way. Not as windy out there today compared to the last couple of days. And there is some fog around, dense fog in a few spots too. This is the big picture, high pressure to the east, low to the west, and we're kind of in between with this weather front straddling across central areas, pushing northwards through the day, so a damp start for Northern Ireland, southern and central Scotland, but that rain is going to edge its way clear. There is some fog around that may take a few hours to clear, and for some it could just stay grey all day, particularly parts of northeast England and northern Scotland. But for most of us, it is going to brighten up through the day, and we'll see some spells of sunshine. Still a bit breezy in the west, but not as windy.